So, you think you've got a case for discrimination? The ins and outs of filing a discrimination complaint. A presentation by the Montana Human Rights Bureau. As a Montana citizen, you have the right to live free of unlawful discrimination. But did you know that you can't just walk into a court with a discrimination complaint? The Montana Human Rights Bureau, or HRB, is the door you must open to access these rights. So come on in, you're welcome here. If you think about it, this makes sense. The state has an interest in eradicating discrimination, so it wants to be the first to know when it's occurring here. The process set out by the laws of our great state provide that the state will receive notice of the discrimination and have a chance to look into the circumstances. And if the state believes discrimination has occurred, it can seek to make the complainant whole and provide the respondent tools to avoid discrimination in the future. HRB investigates complaints of discrimination based on federal and state laws. Montana's discrimination laws are the Montana Human Rights Act and the Governmental Code of Fair Practices. HRB has a contract with the federal government, the EEOC, to investigate employment discrimination complaints under 3 federal laws as well: Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, the ADA, and the ADEA. In most ways, Montana law is very similar to these federal laws, and the HRB uses EEOC guidance when analyzing discrimination complaints. Since HRB is your exclusive remedy if you think your rights were violated under these laws, give us a call and let us know about it. When you call into the HRB, staff will talk to you and get more information to determine if what you are experiencing is something the HRB can look into. The HRB only has the authority to investigate certain types of complaints. Figuratively speaking, there are 4 boxes you will need to check off during your call to the HRB. The first is you have to be able to communicate that a significant discriminatory action was taken against you. Next, that act must have happened within the past 180 days. This is the statute of limitations for filing a discrimination complaint. There's an asterisk there because, apart from very specific situations where you may have gone through a grievance process, there's really no wiggle room to the deadline to file a discrimination complaint within 180 days. The third box is that the discriminatory or adverse act must have occurred in a protected area, which are employment, state or local government, public accommodations, housing, education, or credit, finance, and insurance. Then lastly, the fourth box is that the adverse act must have been taken against you because of your protected class. Protected classes include disability, sex, race, national origin, color, age, religion, creed, vaccination status, marital status, familial status, and political belief. Familial status and political belief have asterisks because they only apply in limited circumstances. Familial status is only a protected class for housing cases, and political belief is only a protected class in the area of state and local government. And if you're able to check off those 4 boxes during your call to the HRB, you will then be scheduled for an intake interview with one of our investigators. While you're waiting for the day of your intake, you'll have some homework to do. It's best to get information gathered and ready in preparation for your intake appointment because you will only have a limited amount of time on the appointment. Remember, what you are looking to do is file a legal document asserting you were discriminated against. So the information has to be sufficient and accurate. You'll want to make sure you have the name, address, and telephone number for the person or business you want to file a complaint against. If you can't tell the HRB who discriminated against you or where to send the complaint, it can't be investigated. It's also a good idea to write out a timeline of events surrounding the adverse or discriminatory act. This timeline should include dates of when specific events happened and the names of those involved in the incident. Also, take some time to think about what you hope to achieve by filing a discrimination complaint. Understanding your goals can help guide you through this lengthy process. So you've called the HRB, checked off the 4 boxes, and gotten on the intake calendar. You did your homework, and now it's time for your intake appointment. But what is an intake appointment? You may be wondering what to expect. Well, turn on your phone, turn your ringer up, and wait for the sweet sound of a call from one of our seasoned investigators. You'll have up to an hour with this investigator to learn about the HRB, its function and processes, as well as a chance to go over what happened that made you reach out to us. The investigator will probably ask you questions and get information from you to see again if you check off those 4 boxes we talked about earlier. Once your investigator gets all the information he or she needs, she or he will likely tell you one of 3 things. You could be told the investigator will draft a complaint based on what you explained. You could be told that no complaint will be drafted because what you described doesn't fall under the HRB's authority to investigate. Or you may be told that your situation needs to be staffed. If the investigator tells you during your intake appointment that he or she wants to staff your intake, that just means that the investigator will present the facts you described in the intake during a staff meeting. Other investigators and supervisors will be able to listen and provide feedback to figure out whether the HRB has authority to investigate your circumstances. Based on that guidance, you will be informed whether or not the HRB will draft a complaint. If after an intake the HRB drafts a complaint, you'll be sent a copy of the complaint for consideration. Understand, you do not have a complaint filed and ready for investigation with the HRB until you sign and date a complaint and then get it back to us for filing. Completing an intake is not the same as filing a complaint. And also, be aware that the HRB can only receive complaints for filing when they are received by mail, fax, or in person at our office in Helena. Filing a complaint is completely up to you, and since you're signing your name to it, you are swearing that it is truthful, so make sure you're reviewing the information in the complaint and you agree with it before you file it. If you're told the HRB will not draft a complaint for you, it doesn't mean we think what is happening to you is fair or even legal. It just means that what you told us doesn't fit under the specific laws we enforce. If your situation doesn't fit under the Montana Human Rights Act or the Governmental Code of Fair Practice, the HRB does not have authority to investigate. If you disagree, you're always welcome to draft your own complaint and file it at the HRB. Remember, the HRB is a neutral. To maintain that neutrality, we cannot give legal advice and we don't represent either side of a case. So keep in mind that we're not saying you have a good or winning case just because we draft a complaint. We are simply saying you have told us enough to believe that we have authority to investigate and your situation is worth looking into. After all this, you may have some questions. Like, what if I don't want to wait for an intake appointment? You may want to get the investigatory process started, or maybe you're up against that 180-day deadline I mentioned earlier. What if HRB won't draft a complaint after my intake, but I still think I have a case? And then, what if I don't like or agree with the complaint HRB drafted after my intake? Well, you have 2 options. You can either write up your own complaint and file it, or you can hire an attorney to do it for you. This is a form the HRB has giving you pointers on how to write a self-drafted complaint. You can call us and ask us to send you this form, or go to our website and find it there too. So whether the HRB drafts a complaint for you after an intake or you write your own complaint, it's still up to you to file it. Again, remember that you don't have a case and we cannot investigate unless you send us a verified complaint. Although the Bureau has gone digital and you may receive emails from us, because of the way the Montana Human Rights Act was written, we can only receive complaints for filing by snail mail, fax, or in person at our office. Also, whatever method you choose for filing your complaint, make sure it will be received by our office by that 180-day deadline. Even if you sign it before the 180 days, the only date that counts for the statute of limitation is the file date. Two things happen right away when our office receives a complaint for filing. First, you get notice that we received your complaint and that it was filed. Typically, this notice comes with an invitation to submit any documents or evidence that supports your case. By the time you are receiving this notice is about the same time that the respondent you filed a complaint against will also be receiving a copy of the complaint. The respondent will be asked to submit a written response to the allegations in your complaint. The HRB cannot begin investigating a case until a respondent acknowledges receiving the complaint. This acknowledgement usually comes in the form of a written response explaining their side of the story. While the HRB is waiting for the response, an investigator will be assigned to the case, which is typically 4 to 6 weeks after the complaint is filed. Once an investigator is assigned to your case, he or she will reach out to you and the respondent to make introductions and begin the process of investigating your case. Each investigation is unique. However, there are certain steps that almost every investigation will go through. Once the response is received, your investigator will forward it to you and ask you to prepare and submit a written rebuttal. Chances are you'll disagree with things you read in the response. The rebuttal is your chance to let us know what you disagree with, why, and what your side of the story is. After the rebuttal, the investigator will work with you and the respondent to obtain additional information and evidence needed for the investigation. This may include things like documents, pictures, or text messages. The investigator will also interview you, the respondent, and witnesses. Most HRB interviews are conducted over the phone. Things can get heavy. It's not always easy standing up for your rights. Filing a complaint is just the first step in the beginning of a long process. You will not get immediate answers, just like you wouldn't get immediate answers if you filed a complaint in court. It takes time to collect information and analyze it. The HRB gets up to 180 days to finish its investigations. We also understand that it may be difficult having to talk about the things that happened to you that made you reach out to us. We try to be sensitive to this, but please understand that we need your cooperation to fully investigate your allegations, and your participation is required. When the investigation is over, your investigator will write a final investigative report. We call it a FIR here at the HRB. The FIR outlines the positions of each party, the witnesses interviewed, the evidence collected, and finally, the analysis. The analysis is the section where the investigator talks about how the law applies to the information obtained during the investigation. Based on this analysis, the investigator will determine whether there is reasonable cause to believe discrimination occurred. Most people are familiar with the reasonable doubt standard required in criminal cases. However, in discrimination cases at the HRB and in court, the standard used is a preponderance of the evidence. That just means a 51 versus 49% probability, or if discrimination more likely than not occurred based on the evidence. Although the HRB makes a finding in all cases, this doesn't mean the end of your complaint. It's best to think of the HRB as a gatekeeper. The HRB's finding in your case will open the gate to the next step in your case and determine what path it takes. During the investigation, you're stuck at a fork in the road. Like I said before, you can't just walk into a Montana court with a discrimination case. You have to first file your complaint with the HRB. Depending on the HRB's finding after an investigation, you'll take one of two paths. If there's a finding of reasonable cause to believe discrimination occurred, you'll take the path that stays with the state's administrative process. On this path, you'll end up going to a hearing at the Department of Labor and Industry's Office of Administrative Hearings. That's if you don't reach a voluntary settlement with the respondent beforehand. If there is a finding of no reasonable cause to believe discrimination occurred after an investigation, you have the option of taking the path of filing a complaint in district court now. This option gets you outside of the state's administrative process. But if you prefer to try to stay with the state's administrative process, you can also appeal the HRB finding to the Human Rights Commission. So you see, it can be a long process, but there are several opportunities for you to pursue your case if you don't like the outcome along the way. And for those who may be impatient or don't like forks in the road, the HRB offers free and confidential mediation for parties while a complaint is being investigated. If you settle the case during mediation, you get to go about your merry way with your voluntary resolution and your case ends right there. If you can't reach a settlement, no biggie either. You just finish up the investigation and continue on in the process. So remember that mediation is an option. So I hope you know now what to do if you think you have a complaint for discrimination here in Montana. Thanks for following along, and if you'd like more information, visit our website at www.montanadiscrimination.com. You can also give us a call toll-free at 1-800-542-0807 or locally at 406-444-2884.